Welcome to the Recovery Effect Podcast with Bill Vineyard. Recovery is Bill's passion and his life's work of 30-plus years. Now it's your turn to experience the Recovery Effect, a powerful mix of recovery, spirituality, philosophy, and most importantly, living life as your true self. Now here's your host, Bill Vineyard.
I was sitting in church last week with my wife, and the whole service was on the cross of Christ. And the scripture that the priest was using come from Luke 9, verse 23, and it said, "If any man will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me." As I was listening to that, the word daily kind of got me to thinking, and I started kind of looking back on my life, wondering if I had any regrets. Ever since I've been sober, I've been trying to live my life with no regrets. But when I was drinking, I had so many regrets, I couldn't live with myself. I couldn't have stayed sober without a total and complete honest four-step. And forgiveness, the guilt and stuff I had and the resentments, they could have never left without God removing those. They could have told me all day, every day, that I needed to forgive myself. That never and doesn't work for me. It just completely didn't work. I mean, think about it for a moment. Let's say that my alcoholic or drug self, my bad self, kills somebody. How can this same self look at that self and say, "I forgive you"? I mean, there's just no way that's going to happen, at least for me. I had to have a higher forgiver than just myself. But when God forgave me, they left. So, doesn't our program kind of say the same thing as that scripture did? The one that said we need to deny ourselves, take up our cross daily, and follow Him? Isn't there an alcoholic and drug addict self that loves being alcoholic and drug addict? At least when you first started? Didn't you just swear by the first shot of dope you ever took? Oh my God, you thought you'd found nirvana. Or the alcohol, first few times you got tipsy or drunk and just felt so free and so alive. Didn't you just fall in love with that alcoholic self and kind of make a commitment that I never wanted to be anything else but that? And then when we started in the program, didn't we have to deny ourselves, that alcoholic and drug addict self? Or what it says, die to self in order to get clean and sober? Didn't we have to deny or die to that alcoholic and drug addict self for any hope at having a life? Doesn't even the big book say that we have to give themselves to this simple program? That selfish self is the root of all our problems. I remember reading that in the third step of the big book when it says, selfishness, that we think is the root of our problem. That actually made me mad because I thought drinking was the root of my problems. But it was selfishness. And it also went on to say that there seemed to be no way of entirely getting rid of self without God's aid. We had to have God's help. That alcoholic and drug self was literally going to kill me. And it will try to kill you. You don't have to believe me on that issue. Just look at the ones that have been unable or unwilling to let go of it and join us. Where's the results of their life? Dead or prison? Many of us pursued that type of self. That's me putting in the words self. Many of us tried to pursue that type of ideas, self, to the gates of insanity or death. That's where that leads. Keeping that alcoholic self and refusing to deny or let that self die is going to kill you. The third step is so rich in information about the self and the denying of the self. You know, after the first, second step, after we do those, when we look at the third step, what does it say? God, I offer myself to thee, to build with me and do with me as thou wilt. What's this? Relieve me of the bondage of self. The big book, and obviously Bill, thought that we were in bondage to this self. We're in bondage to the alcohol, the drugs, but we're in bondage to the selfishness. We get up every morning, we bow down to this God of self and ask, how can I serve you today? And it tells you exactly what it wants. Well, in this third step prayer, it's asking to be relieved of that bondage, to stop our self-serving ways of living. It's like we're in a straitjacket and we just can't get out of it without His help. It goes on to say, being convinced that self, manifested in various ways, is what had defeated us. Self, as it manifested itself differently in different ways, it's exactly what defeated us. It's our self beat us. And another beautiful reading in there, it said, but he had found God, and by finding God, listen, had found himself. We can't find self without his aid. Isn't that a beautiful reading right there? I mean, if you think about that, that is the answer to finding your real self. Now, it's more involved in that, but that right there is a sign, like a road sign that tells us where to look. It says, but he had found God, and by finding God, had found himself. That's where the self is located, like you lost your keys. This is where you find yourself. And in the last paragraph on page 164, it says, abandon yourself to God as you understand God. Us alcoholics and drug addicts who's actually working a good program, we shouldn't have any problem understanding these two selves, our real self and our alcoholic, drug, and bad self. So now we know what denies self, or the dying to self, is and means. It's that unreal, self-created, alcoholic and drug self. It's that self that you wanted to be Scarface that you created, or Party Girl that you created. That's the one we're talking about. That must have been the one the priest was talking about when he said that we had to deny ourselves. And what's so cool about that is I could find it right in our literature, and it was explained in much greater detail. And guess what else? The priest left off the solution on how you deny yourself, but our program doesn't. It tells you how to do that. What does it mean to deny yourself? It tells you right there in that third step and the fourth step. Well, in all the steps. If you work the steps, you have denied and you have died to that self. That self is gone. Look at the people in the program that's sitting in those meetings. Listen to their story, what it used to be like. You could say what I used to be like. What happened? They're telling you the answer, and then they're telling you the results of that answer, what I'm like now. Two selves right there, and we find that real self, the good self, we find by working them steps, working this program. So now that we got that kind of figured out, what does it mean to pick up your cross daily? What would that mean to us in the program? Of course, your cross in the beginning is, admitting you're powerless, your life's unmanageable, being aware of your insanity and knowing that you need a power greater than yourself to restore you to sanity because you realize you're insane when you think you can drink or drug normally and get away with it with no problems. Another way of carrying your cross is you have to make a decision in step 3 to turn your will and life over to the care of God as you understood him. And then do an inventory, and after you get done that, admit to God, yourself, another human being, the exact natures of your wrong. And then 6 and 7 is asking him to remove those character defects and all that other stuff. Then you make a list of amends, and then you make the amends that you made a list of. And then even after you're done with all them great but hard spiritual exercises, you continue to take a personal inventory when you're wrong, promptly admit it. And then you sought through prayer and meditation to improve. And then you practice these principles in all your affairs. At first, that's our cross. And honestly, that's our cross till the day we die. We'll carry that with us forever. And the reason it's a cross is because the world doesn't like that. They don't live like that. But we live like that. And so it kind of becomes a cross. It does become a cross. It's hard to bear sometimes. It's hard to use those principles when someone's done you wrong and you have to get on your knees and pray that God gives them everything you want in your life. That's not normal living according to the world. And it also goes against ourself, what we want to do. And that causes a lot of discomfort. There's also in the world that employers won't hire us if we have a record or we've been in trouble with drugs or we can't get the right apartment. Well, that's the cross we have to bear. Living life by spiritual principles is hard. Practicing them principles in all our affairs, that's tough. And when we're wrong, promptly admit it. God, I hate that. It takes so much humility, which I'm totally short in, to promptly admit when I'm wrong. I do admit it, but it's never promptly. And then, of course, I got to carry the message to other people. Even when you're tired, you're sitting in front of the TV, you want to crash out and your phone rings, or you got to get up and go help out another alcoholic. Even when you're tired and don't want to, you got to deny yourself there too and pick up your cross. Back when I got sober, we never did just take people to treatment like they do nowadays. They just pick them up and shove them into treatment. We sobered them up in our clubhouse. Our whole club came together to help that 1 or 2 people who needed to get sober. We detoxed them right there. Well, it was so beautiful to have all the club around and We got to talk and have a lot of good fellowship. And I tell you, when that guy came out of that bedroom in 3 to 5 days, he loved every person that helped him through that detoxification. I remember one such incident when my sponsor called me and he said, "Hey, Bill, we got one." So I headed down to the club. Me and him was sitting with him, kind of checking out, see if he really wanted it or not. And I want to tell you, this guy was one tough dude. He was a prize fighter, but what really made me and my sponsor think how tough he was is he drove in a snowstorm from Washington State all the way to Kansas. He said he went off the road in Colorado and he dug his own self out of a ditch with his bare hands. I mean, you could tell this guy was really tough. My sponsor called the rest of the guys there, and all of us got together, and we detoxed him for about 5 days, and he wanted to go to treatment, so we drove him to a treatment center, which was probably about 150 miles from the club. And after we got him in the treatment center, and he was sitting in the chair, and we talked to the staff, got him all checked in, all of us guys, there was about 4 of us that took him, went by and shook his hand and wished him the best. And as we was doing this, a tear came down this guy's eye. And when we walked out of there, my sponsor nudged me and said, "Now, Bill, that's AA." But it was because of our self-sacrifice and being willing to carry the cross that has been given to us that we was able to experience the joy and love that we did when we detoxed that guy. Another way of carrying our cross is we have to stop lying, stealing, hurting others. We have to be more self-sacrificing. We have to stop being inconsiderate and selfish. To kill inconsiderate, we need to consider what we say and what we do and how that's going to affect others. We have to do the opposite of selfishness, be self-giving. We have to thank God for the bad things and the adversities that hit us. I know years ago when the flood hit my home and we lost everything we had, I remember an old technique that my sponsor told me to do, and he says every time you hit with a really tough adversity, get out on your knees and thank God for that adversity. I jumped right down there on my knees without hesitation when that thought came to me because my sponsor was right all the time. And I thank God that my house flooded and it took some of the sting away from it. So why don't we find the principles, the spiritual principles that we want to live by, write them down, and practice one of them each day. Or you could pick out a character defect, as my sponsor told me, just one a day, find the opposite or whatever destroys that character defect and practice that day. You don't want to go to meetings? Why don't you deny yourself, pick up your cross, and follow your butt right into the halls of AA? So now we have a little better idea of what it means to deny self and pick up our cross. Now, what does it mean to follow me when that priest read that? Well, of course, I always take my program and my God to church with me, and sometimes I use the Big Book as my Bible. So when he said, "Follow me," I remembered what the Big Book says. It says, "Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path." That means following in those footsteps. That's what following means. It means to experience what he experienced, to do what he did. If you're in this world, you're going to suffer. No getting out of that. But following that path, I guess the way Christ meant it, was to follow the path he walked. And that was a path of suffering and of love and of giving and of compassion. What does our Big Book say? It says, follow our path. Those that came before us, our sponsor, his sponsor, it goes all the way back to Dr. Bob and Bill. We follow that path, wherever that leads. Sometimes it leads to suffering, sometimes it leads to happiness. But the point is what it means to follow. It means to walk in his steps. When you look at a map, you can see many, many paths, and you wonder which path should I take? Well, look at the one that Dr. Bob and Bill W. took and go, oh, that's the path to sobriety. And so you take that path. And how do you take that path? You follow that path. We don't need to make a new path. We don't need to follow some progressive path. We need to follow the path that has been provided for us, the path to sobriety, the path to successful living. As I said before, Christ had a path of suffering, doing good, loving. So these disciples of his, those 12, followed that path. And do you know 11 of them died because of following that path, and the 12th one was exiled to an island by himself and died there because they followed that path. Don't freak out when bad things happen. This is not a, if I do good, I will get good kind of thing. No, there are times when you do good, the return you get is going to be bad. I mean, Bill went through pure hell trying to put this program together. Can you imagine trying to write a big book and put steps in there with 100 alcoholics advising you on it? I would have never ever took it to him. I don't have that much courage, but Bill did. And he went through a lot over that. Dr. Bob died of a terrible disease. Bill died of emphysema. He couldn't breathe. They had to carry him, I think, on a board in his last talk that he gave. Even evil, selfish people suffer. Look at these big-time drug cartel people. I mean, they don't escape that. What matters is who you're suffering for, what you're following that's causing your suffering. Suffering's a given. Bad things are going to happen to everybody. It just depends on who you're following when you're experiencing these bad things, who and what you're doing. Just like your decision in the third step. I made a decision to turn my will and life over to the care of God as we understood it. That's what matters, the decision you make on who to follow and how you're going to follow him. As we come to the end of this, I'd like to tell you a little kind of a cute story about a monk. And every night he prayed to God that God would give him a lighter cross, that his cross was just too heavy to bear. And he did that day after day, week after week, month after month. Well, the story goes on and says that one night the angel came to this guy, this monk, and said, God has heard your prayers and is going to answer them. Come with me. So the monk followed this angel into this room, and it was a room full of crosses. There was wooden crosses, there's plastic crosses, there was iron crosses, all kinds of crosses. And the angel said to him, God told me to tell you that you could pick out any cross in here you wanted. And the monk looked around for a long time, and finally he saw it, the smallest, lightest cross in the whole room. And he told the angel, I'll take that one. And the angel looked down at him and said, well, that's the one you've had all along. In other words, the crosses or cross that we have to bear, we are totally sufficient and qualified to do it, or we wouldn't have it. We're not only sufficient to carry that cross, but we're also able to deny ourselves by the working of this program and follow him. Follow these steps. Those are the steps, just like a map, 1 through 12, and all the other principles you learn in the program. Just follow that. So, I think Dr. Bob and Bill W. would have said, if any alcoholic or drug addict wants to come after me, in other words, wants what we have, let him deny himself, in other words, completely give himself to this simple program. Let him take up his cross daily, meaning practice these principles in all our affairs, and follow me. In other words, thoroughly follow our path. I think that we can tie those two together and have a beautiful experience and a lot deeper knowledge of how we're supposed to do this thing and what this thing means. If you want what we have and are willing to go to any length, then you're going to have to take certain steps. Those steps are the path that leads us to the destination of sobriety and good living. So I'll close this podcast with the last 2 paragraphs found in the Big Book on page 164. Abandon yourselves to God as you understand God. Admit your faults to Him and to your fellows. Clear away the wreckage of your past. Give freely of what you find and join us. We shall be with you in the fellowship of the Spirit, and you will surely meet some of us as you trudge the road of happy destiny. May God bless you and keep you until then.
Thanks for listening to The Recovery Effect with Bill Vineyard. Check out more at therecoveryeffect.com and facebook.com/therecoveryeffect. And don't forget to give us a 5-star rating on iTunes.